Now, the Falklands may have become the most valuable property on Earth. Well, possibly it has after Russia has discovered a vast oil reserve in the British Antarctic territory, around 500 billion barrels worth of crude oil, 10 times the North Sea's output, have been discovered in the Weddell Sea. And if you've heard of the Weddell Sea before, you're ahead of me. It's in the east of the Antarctic Peninsula, and it's very much in the UK's territory. However, in Antarctica, boundaries are simply claims rather than lines to show ownership. Therefore, making this discovery provides the perfect excuse for Putin to tip the icebergs of geopolitics. Any drilling for this oil would represent a breach of the international treaty that has stood in place for decades, banning all activity relating to mineral resources other than scientific research. The Russian geological agency, Rosgeo, has insisted that the surveys taking place to announce this discovery are simply of a scientific nature. But aren't experts right to see the concerning side to this if Putin proceeds? Well, I'm joined now by Seb Kennedy, the founding editor of Energy Flux News. So thank you very much for joining me this evening, Seb. Putin has been carrying out scientific surveys and has discovered all this oil. If there's 500 billion barrels of oil, somebody's going to get it out, aren't they?
Well, are they really, Jacob? I mean, let's think about this first of all. This is a very high-level speculative estimate, which is subject to a great deal of further work before you can clarify exactly how much is held in place. Recoverable reserves tend to be just a fraction of the reserves in place that are identified. There are all sorts of constraints to getting oil out of the ground, which means that the real estimate could be, just 10 or 20% of that. This is an extremely pristine, high-value part of the world, and it's extremely inhospitable. Very, very hard to develop and work in those conditions. And who would finance it? Which bank or financier would put their money into Antarctic oil drilling?
If it's 10 or 20%, that's 50 to 100 billion barrels of oil, so it's still a huge amount. And this was said when the North Sea began to be explored, wasn't it? That it was enormously technologically difficult, and that technology develops and mankind's ingenuity is very considerable. And so the ability to overcome technical barriers, particularly depending on the price of oil, means that it's going to be attractive for somebody, and risk capital is always available.
Yeah, you're right. And that is the big risk, is that technological advances make this possible in tandem with the declining availability of conventional resources, which we've seen has given rise to much harder to develop resources such as shale in the US. And there's also the very worrying possibility that non-aligned states would use their state funds to bankroll Antarctic oil drilling. And that would be an absolute disaster, frankly.
Why would it be a disaster? It would provide more cheap energy. It would help my constituents to heat their homes. It would make our economies grow. This is surely good news.
Is it really, Jacob? Is that what we want? Do we really want to have a kind of a military-backed land grab driven by a desperate push for fossil fuel resources?
Well, I mean, if anything, to be military-backed. That there are very legitimate, long-standing claims to areas of Antarctica. They're well established.
There are only claims. There's a treaty and a non-drilling moratorium in place, which is not up for renewal until the year 2048. If anybody was to break that, then it would open the floodgates to a real resource rush in the Antarctic, which is the polar opposite, excuse the pun, of what we should really be aiming for right now.
Right, thank you. I love bad puns, so I'm very grateful for your last answer. Thank you very much, Seb. I'm now